So in this video, we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship and why musicians make great entrepreneurs, generally speaking. So I'm joined with Panos Panay, and he is the Vice President for Innovation and Strategy with Berklee College of Music. So thank you, Panos, for being here today.
Thank you.
So what is entrepreneurship? I feel like that's a term that's kind of tossed around a lot, and some people know what it means. Most people don't. So tell us, what is entrepreneurship?
Well, for one, it's a very complicated word and impossible to spell.
It is impossible to spell.
But for me, entrepreneurship is more of a state of mind and a bias towards action, a willingness to be creative, to experiment, to fail. Interestingly, the original application of the word actually was first used for the concept of a music promoter. Back in France, and it's something that fascinated me, especially as I've been going through this journey. So for me, I don't think there's such a thing as a prototypical entrepreneur. Again, it's an act of wanting to create something of value, but I don't see that as any different from the desire to express something as a creative person. We tend to use the word entrepreneurship here at Berklee in its far broader application rather than the very narrow definition. And similar to the way that we actually see the concept of being a musician. We don't just think of it as an act of performing, but more as a way of relating to the world in a fairly unique way.
You know, I've taken your creativity and entrepreneurship course. I've gone through it, and I love when you talk about kind of how musicians already have a lot of the key components or the makings of someone who might be considered an entrepreneur. So can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of this creativity that you're discussing now?
Well, I went through that journey myself. So I graduated from Berklee. I came here to be a musician, and I ended up pursuing a business path and starting my own business in sonic bids. And for years, to be honest with you, I sort of ran away from the fact that I was a musician. And it wasn't until I came to Berklee to start the Institute for Creative Entrepreneurship that I sort of thought a lot about my background. And I did conclude that actually I always thought as a musician. I like to say that if you're a musician, you can't perform music unless you're a good listener. If you are a traditional or prototypical entrepreneur, then the ability to be hyper aware and observant of the environment around you and the changes that happen. So you can apply the musical metaphor, right? The chord changes onto the entrepreneurial journey. So unless you are hypersensitive to what's happening around you, you won't be successful in either discipline.
And that goes for creating music and also being aware of the market that you're...
Without a doubt.
Right.
And musicians are extremely intuitive. Any musician on any stage has this sixth sense, if you will, of what's going on around them and how the audience is feeling at that particular time. That is the same sense that you use as an entrepreneur in terms of gauging market demand, how your customers feel about something. But then another area that fascinates me is this concept of collaboration. We often think, at least on the business side, that, well, if you just define the roles that you need, then you just go and hire the people that play those parts and everything is fine. But that's not quite the case. I think a far more applicable analog to this is actually the way that musicians go about collaborating and making music. It's both multidisciplinary, but it's also extremely intuitive. And there's an inherent trust involved in the music making process. I trust that you know what you're doing and you trust that I know what I'm doing. But more importantly, we trust that as a unit, whether it's a duo, a trio, a quartet, whatever it may be, right? That as a unit, we will create something interesting together, even if we're just meeting for the first time. There's that unspoken understanding and trust that to some degree, the end product that we will create together will be interesting because I trust that you're going to bring something unique to this conversation. In the entrepreneurial process, especially in the early days of something, that's a far better way of selecting who you work with rather than just sort of writing on a sheet of paper, well, I need an accountant, and I need a salesperson, I need a marketing person, and I need a coder. Often, some of the best companies on the planet were started because two people just kind of, quote, vibed. So in thinking a lot about this, I feel that in today's world, where change is constant, thinking a lot more like a musician when it comes to concepts of paying attention to the environment, listening to your instincts with respect to who you collaborate with, thinking quickly and improvisationally, being able to, quote, own the stage and present an effective argument, which is what a musician intuitively does every night they get on a stage. They convince an audience of a new reality, right? Those instincts, for me, are far more applicable to the entrepreneurial journey than a traditional sort of business think, if you will. Life is not that neat. It's not about writing a perfect business plan and executing flawlessly against that. I like to use the analogy of gardening versus architecting something. You're much more of a gardener when you're running a business than you are an architect. If you have this trust, then the concept of a leader is actually continuously evolving based on situations, similar to the way that musicians interact in a live setting on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being aware of, as a leader, I think being aware of your strengths and your weaknesses really play into that, so that you can surround yourself with people who can augment the things that maybe you struggle with, so that you can really begin to trust those people and create something really special.
Yeah, and another area that I've been talking actually quite a bit about is that failure, which is the big F word in entrepreneurship, is an endemic part of the music making process. Even if you are the world's most accomplished musician, the first time that you try anything, you will fail, and you accept it as part of the learning journey. As a matter of fact, the only way to master anything is to fail time and again. For some reason in our careers, or in our business endeavors, if you will, we tend to associate failure with an end rather than as a step to a process.
As an iterative process.
As an iterative process.
So can you give some concrete, tangible advice for these kinds of burgeoning artists on how to actually take these skills that they may already have and really transfer them over to the business side of managing a band, of doing the publicity for their band, all that kind of stuff that the business side of things entails?
Yeah, I would say don't separate the two. Look at them as two critical parts of your ability to bring what's inside of you outside, and that the, quote, business side of you is actually no different than the creative side of you. We are one person, right? And you shouldn't sort of say, well, now I'm putting my business hat on and I'm leaving my creativity aside. Actually, what makes you successful as a musician is the very thing that's going to make you successful as an entrepreneur. Also, don't approach the business side, if there is such a thing, as something that's the equivalent of chewing bitter greens, right? If you approach it as part of your creative expression, and that it's something fun, just as fun as creating music, but you're creating, quote, music in a different way, that just as you get enjoyment from standing in front of an audience and moving them, right, because of the power of what you're communicating to them through your music, if you apply that and you say, well, I'm going to enjoy moving my prospective consumers or customers in the same way, but I'm using different levers, you'll enjoy the process a lot better. And also understanding that unless you do that, barring maybe the desire to be a hobbyist, then you will never have the ability to accomplish what you set out to accomplish, which I think for any creative person, it's the ability to communicate with others and bring this gift that's inside of you to them and moving them because you're doing that.
I absolutely agree with everything that you're saying. I think that it deepens your understanding of your fans, and it deepens their understanding of you.
Yeah, I think that it's important that whatever you do, that it feels consistent with your values and with your authentic self, if you will. So I think it's important to not approach it as if, well, I just have to be great at everything. I have to learn how to crowdfund, and I have to learn how to use Twitter and Facebook, and Pinterest and Instagram and so forth. Find those channels that are authentic and feel real to you. Work at them, because look, nothing is going to feel natural the first time. Just like, again, going back to your musical instincts, the first time that you got on stage was probably the most terrifying thing ever. And just like the first time that you picked up a guitar or played the piano or programmed Ableton or whatever it may be, right? So that's my advice to people starting out. But critical that you try, that you understand that this is just as important, if you will, as whatever, learning your scales, practicing, whatever vocals you're doing. It's just part of the same thing.
That is excellent advice. So is there any kind of last idea that you want to share?
Sure. Work with people that are interesting and people that you have fun working with. I've learned in my career that the most difficult decisions, but the most important decisions you make, are not about money, they're not about products, they're not about songs, they're not about where you live. I mean, it's not all that. Actually, they tend to be about the people that surround yourself with. Going back to the first thing we discussed, it's trust. So to play with people and to create something enjoyable and different, that needs to be the first thing that's present.
Absolutely. I completely 100% agree. I want to make sure that I can trust my musicians, that I can trust my producer, my manager, anybody that I work with. I think that's the number one thing that I look for is this someone who shares my vision, and I trust that they have my vision at heart. So thank you so much, Panos, for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. And thanks.
Thank you.